Okay, welcome everybody to Jewish Women's Learning. Lovely to be together. Our topic for tonight is Tzniut, also sometimes pronounced Tznius, and incorrectly translated as modesty. And we're going to challenge some of the misconceptions about Tzniut tonight. And hopefully by the end, we'll have a much broader definition, because often when people are talking about Tzniut or modesty and they're thinking of it in the context of Judaism, what's the first thing that they think about usually? Dressing, clothes, right?
Do I have to wear a hat?
Do I have to wear a hat?
Yeah.
Is my skirt the right length? Yeah. Do I have to wear one at all? You know, what about the length of my sleeves? All of these questions. And what we're going to understand tonight is that those questions are not to do with the origins of Tzniut. They're one of the ways we express our Tzniut, and they differ from place to place and time to time, but there are also some consistent themes about Tzniut in Judaism. And if we can delve back into the Talmud and the Torah and look at where this concept of Tzniut comes from, we're going to have a much better idea of how it relates to all aspects of our lives, and hopefully how it can be something that isn't just about rules and restrictions, but is actually about our essence and who we are, and that there's a positivity about it. Because I think one of the other misconceptions about Tzniut is that it's very negative. It's all about these things you can't do, and that there's shame surrounding it and that kind of thing. So we're going to try and challenge some of those misconceptions. One of the Rebbitzins that I was learning from, Rebbitzin Chaya Nebel, talked about some of the other different misconceptions that come with Tzniut. And another one was that it's a problem with our bodies. This idea that there's something inherently wrong or problematic about our bodies, that we need to cover them up. So that's another misconception we're going to challenge. And that it's all about women. And one of the things that we will look at is that the concept of Tzniut is something that is in every part of Judaism, even in as much as objects and actions and mitzvot, which have nothing to do particularly with gender, but also that Tzniut is an expectation for men as well. And again, if we're not going to translate Tzniut as modesty, we need to look for some other alternatives. And she offers ideas like privacy or hiddenness, an inner dimension or an internality, as opposed to just modesty. And again, when we look at these origins, we're going to understand why. One of my favorite examples of Tzniut, of modesty that isn't to do with physicality or the body or gender, is actually tzedakah, giving charity. And when we look at the Rambam's levels of tzedakah and charity, one of the absolute highest levels is when what? The giver and the receiver don't know each other.
Don't know
right?
who they are.
Absolutely. And that hiddenness of the mitzvah, that its destination is hidden and its origin is hidden, elevates it to a hugely spiritual level. And so what we're going to learn about tonight is why, when things are kept hidden or secret or private, or when they're only revealed at the right time, it's two things. One, it elevates them, but the other aspect is that there's something inherently holy about things that are hidden too. So if we look at the example of the way that a shul is laid out, and we think about the Torah, let's say you walk from the outside of the shul, let's try and work out how many layers we have between us and the holy text of the Torah. So first of all, what have you got on the outside when you walk up to the building?
Ian,
I like that. Yes, you've got to get past security first, right? Once you've said Shabbat Shalom to Ian. Next layer?
door.
Yeah, good. Next layer?
Door again.
Well,
That's security.
yes,
yeah.
we're being very specific about which shul. Let's go for any shul. Yeah. Yeah. If you're wanting to get to the Torah, what's next once you're in the sanctuary?
You have to get into the shul.
Yep, you're in the shul, and then?
You have to open the Torah.
Great. And to get there, you first got the parochet, the curtain.
Yeah.
Then you've got a separate curtain and ark, depending on what kind of shul. So you might have an ark and the curtain. Then once you actually get to the Torah itself, we have a whole set of ceremony around how we actually access the text of the Torah, right? You've got, often crowns or adornment. You've got the dress of the Torah itself, and I'm just looking at lovely Evelyn, thinking our most recent Torah cover is the one that Michael and Evelyn donated in honor of their wedding anniversary. So you take off the precious cover, and all of these things are very precious as well. And then finally, you've actually got a belt that goes around the Torah too. We're talking here about an Ashkenazi scroll. With a Sephardi scroll, you've actually got like a metal container that gets opened up. And then once you've got that, even the text itself is on the inside of the parchment, right? So that you actually have to unroll the Torah to be able to see these holy words. That's a lot of layers because something is so precious and hidden. And we see the same thing with our own physical self, our bodies. When you look at which parts of our bodies are the most precious and delicate, they're contained inside ourselves, right? If we look at our brain and how important that is, the protection that's around our brain in terms of the fluid, the skull, the skin, the hair, like there are a lot of layers here. Whereas when we look at something like fingernails, which are seen in Judaism to have less holiness, they're right on the edge. They can snap off at any moment, as many of you will know, right? So we can see mirrored in Jewish practice, even in our own physicality, the way that hiddenness is something that is really, really precious. The other thing is that when we keep something hidden or make it secret or hide it or keep it private, it adds its value. So God forbid someone breaks into this house and they come in and they discover that there's a very special jewellery box. And inside, my mum has a piece of jewellery that I made her when I was a child. They're going to think that that's really valuable because it's in a secret place in the house in a special box and that they have to open it to get to it. And they'd be more likely to pinch it than if it was lying amongst toys, for example. So sometimes it's the very act of hiding something that makes it precious as well. It can go in both directions. And so that's one of the ways that we can rethink modesty, is about this idea of privacy or hiddenness and what impact that has on the object that's hidden and on those who are considering the object as well. So let's go back to the beginning and start off with creation, right? The story of creation. There's, when we talk about the text of the Torah and we talk about midrash, we're talking about the story behind the story. So we've got the story in the Torah, which is like the basic essence of what we need to know. And then the midrash tells us, well, what was the story behind us? And the midrash that I want to draw on is from Yalkut Shimoni and talks about when Hashem created Eve, Chava, the first woman. And there's this idea, right, of the man and the woman being stuck together back to back. And then they divide, and we've got this rib that comes from Adam, the first man, and that Eve is crafted around this rib. And I don't know, has anyone ever wondered why the rib? Why not another part of the body?
Incorrectly translated.
Yeah, so there are questions about translation as well. Interestingly, the word I want to draw on in terms of translation isn't rib, but built. Because in the text, it talks about he, Hashem, built her from the rib. And actually, the word build, vayiven, is connected to the word lehitbonen, to contemplate. And this midrash draws on that to say that actually Hashem contemplated where to draw Eve from. And he goes through and he goes, well, not the head, because I don't want her to be too light-headed, and not the eye, because I don't want her to be looking into other people's business too much, and not the ear, because I don't want her eavesdropping. And it goes even into giving examples of different people, different women who have displayed traits that we might want to avoid. So it says, not the mouth, because I don't want her to be talkative in the wrong way, and gives the example of Miriam speaking lashon hara, speaking badly about Moshe, about her sister-in-law. And then, not the heart, because Hashem didn't want us to be jealous, and he talks about Rachel and Leah And, you know, we've got lovely examples of their relationship, but we've also got examples of jealousy between the sisters. And he says, not the hand. He didn't want us touching everything. And he talks about, again, Rachel and taking, you know, the idols. And then he says, not the leg, because, you know, you don't want her running from here to there and going where she shouldn't, and talks about Dinah. So each of these examples brings us to the question, so why the rib? And the idea, yeah, sure.
You're talking about Adam and Eve,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That God created,
Mhm.
right? And then now you started to talk about Miriam and all the other women and everything else.
Yeah.
But they came after Adam and Eve.
Totally. And I guess whenever
I'm
we're
getting
thinking, it's a
confused.
great question. Whenever we're thinking about Hashem, we need to kind of suspend our thoughts of chronological time, because time doesn't matter to Hashem, right? He knows everything that went and that comes and all of that. But this is also...
Because he didn't know these people.
Yeah, this is also, well, he already knew they'd be there. We just didn't yet, right? And I mean, that's, I think, a really interesting topic for another class, to talk about how it works out that we have free will and Hashem already knows what we're going to do, right? How does that work? It's a whole nother class, interesting one. But again, this is one midrash, one way of expanding the story. But yeah, we are using the example of creation just to understand why, or how could this rib possibly be created to Tzniut, to the idea of modesty, or this hiddenness. It's a very good question. So he created from a hidden part of the body, the rib. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because when we think about Tzniut as a restriction, right? Oh, all these things we can't do because we need to be modest. It can feel quite imposing. But when we look at it this way, it's part of our essence and who we are. You know, we were created from this inner part, this protected, hidden, secret inner part. And we could have been created from all these external parts, but we weren't. And so one idea, and this is something that Mrs. Samirat Borovitz, one of the teachers at Machon Chana, talks about, is that actually Tzniut's not a wish, it's not a command, but rather there's something in our true nature. And as we all know, when there's something in our true nature, it's painful or difficult to go against it. And that's why sometimes in our lives, when we've made choices where we haven't kept things hidden that should have been hidden, or we haven't kept privacy around things that should be private, we feel a sense of shame. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about our physical privacy, but even, you know we've all been in those situations where something, for example, has come out of our mouth that we wish had stayed in there, and it doesn't feel great, right? So for those examples as well, this is the idea around Tzniut. So if we're going to look at the original meaning and understanding of Tzniut, we now understand its connection to the female from a creation perspective. But if we want to find out what the Jewish law originally had in mind, it's useful also to look at the Talmud, right? To look at what the Gemara, what the sages say about Tzniut. Now, how are we going temperature-wise? For me, it's very warm in here. Yeah.
Heater can
Do
go
we need
on or off.
I feel just right.
Just right? Okay, lovely.
Can I
I've got
ask
internal heating, so.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You mentioned that there is Tzniut in relation to men.
Yes. Should we start there and then we'll come back to the Talmud, or do you want to do the Talmud first?
Because you were referring to women, and I'd quite like to hear how.
Sure. So maybe what we'll do is we'll give 2 examples of men and 2 examples of women that the Talmud talks about, and then we'll zoom in on examples specifically about men that the Talmud gives. So we'll use male and female role models, and then we'll look at some practical examples for men. Great question. So in Masechet Megillah, the Talmud gives 3 examples, 2 women and 1 man, and then the Midrash adds another man. So the 4 people that are used in relation to modesty as role models are Rachel, King Saul, Shaul, Queen Esther, and the Midrash adds Benjamin, one of the sons of Jacob. And for each of them, there might be ideas that we might have about their modesty, but the ideas the Talmud has might surprise you. So the Talmud brings a pasuk, a quote from the Torah for each, or from the Tanakh for each of these people to explain. For Rachel, the reason that she is held up as an epitome of modesty and tzniut is not to do with how she behaved or dressed, or, you know, in relation to kind of when she met her future husband, nothing like that. It's to do with her giving the signs, the symbols to her sister Leah. So just to jog our memories, right? We've got a situation where Yaakov has worked for Lavan, his future father-in-law, for 7 years in order to try and win the hand of his daughter Rachel in marriage. And we know Lavan's a trickster, and he wants to swap Leah, the elder sister that Yaakov does not love, for Rachel, the younger sister that he loves and he's been promised. And as part of this, to avoid this, there are special signs between Yaakov and Rachel that are communicated, that he says, make these signs so that I will know it's you, so I'm not tricked into marrying someone else. Okay? You know, because she's covered, she's got a veil, she can't see who she is. And so what happens? Lavan sets up this situation where the older sister is going to be married off first. And in order to protect her sister's dignity, Rachel shows these signs to Leah, so that when she goes into the wedding and Yaakov makes the signs at her, she's not humiliated by everybody else that is, exposed to the fact that it's the wrong sister. So what she does is she keeps the deceit of her father hidden, keeps it a secret by giving Leah these signs in order to protect her dignity. And that is given as the example of Tzniut. It doesn't say how long her skirt was. It doesn't say how she covered her hair after marriage. It says she kept the secret for her sister Leah of this switch, and she helped her by giving the signs. So that's the first example, and that's a woman. Let's look at our second example, which is a man, King Saul. We have loads of examples of what a modest person King Saul was. And interestingly, there are so many examples that the Talmud could have given. He's famous for, during his own coronation, hiding in luggage to try and avoid all the fanfare, right? You don't get more kind of humble or modest that at your own coronation, you're kind of hiding away. We also see that when he went into the cave, the story of when he is followed into the cave, King David's hiding in the cave actually already, and Saul comes in and he cuts a piece of his cloak. Mm-hmm. The background to that story is, why did Saul go into the cave in the first place?
To rest.
One might think to rest. It's actually a little less classy than that. He needed to relieve himself, right? King Saul needed to go to the bathroom. And so not only did he not go in public in front of others, he didn't even go outside. He went to the cave. He went to the back of the cave. But what we know from this story is he didn't even take his robe off, right? He had the robe, even in what he thought was the privacy of cave where no one could see him. He was very modest in the way that he relieved himself. And this is also one of the things that inspired King David, is what a righteous man. This is how modest he is. So that could have been an example, but the Talmud doesn't give that. Doesn't give the coronation hiding, doesn't give the modesty that he conducted his own bodily functions with. What it gives as the example is that when he is anointed secretly, and he goes, because he was looking for his father's oxen, we have the whole story of how he's secretly anointed. He didn't tell his companion as they walked back together what had happened, and he didn't tell anyone else. He didn't reveal the secret. So once again, modesty, you don't reveal the secret. So that's one from a woman, one from a man. We're going to do it again. Next woman we're going to look at, Queen Esther. Okay, again, so many examples we could give for Queen Esther's modesty. With the beauty pageant, all of these other women were adorning themselves with all kinds of extra makeup, perfumes, clothing, jewelry, and she didn't ask for any extra adornment. right? That seems like, from what we would have thought modesty was, that this would be a great example for Tzniut. Talmud doesn't even touch it. The Talmud says that she kept the secret of her Jewish identity, and that is what made her tznius. That's what made her modest. Okay. One last one, another man, and then
Just
we'll.
say that's very challenging.
Yeah, tell us a little bit
If you,
about
no,
why it's
if you
challenging.
think about ourselves as we live in a secular world, and as it's more popular and less popular to be Jewish,
Yeah.
like that sounds like the reverse of being proud of being Jewish.
Except she did reveal it at the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. How do we balance the idea of being modest with the idea of being proud about the things we should be proud about, and doing a kiddush Hashem, sanctifying Hashem's name when we have the opportunity to do so? And the idea is an inherent in here, because all of these secrets eventually came out in one way or another. Saul couldn't pretend not to be the king forever, right? Esther couldn't pretend not to be Jewish forever. Eventually it became clear to Yaakov that he'd married the other sister. So eventually these secrets do come out. But I guess the message here is it's all about timing, right? Being able to hold on to something that's quiet in terms of timing. And we actually do see that with a parallel if we are thinking about clothing and bodies, because the ideal in Judaism is that one would dress modestly. But in terms of being intimate, the ideal, especially from a Kabbalistic or mystical perspective, is to be completely naked. So it's not that the body is wrong, but more that the secret of the body is revealed at the appropriate time. Even the mikveh, one of the holiest things we can do is immerse ourselves in the mikveh. That's done completely naked. So for all of these things, it's hiddenness plus timing. So thank you for asking, because it's an essential part that I had not explained. So the Midrash, so this isn't the Talmud, this is the Midrash. Again, the story behind the story. The Midrash adds Benyamin. And there's some interesting clues here in the Hebrew. Is everybody familiar with the breastplate that the Kohen Gadol would wear? That there was a stone, 12 stones, one for each? Tribe, yeah, one for each tribe. Good. So the tribe of Benyamin, the stone on the breastplate is called the yashpah. And it comes from yesh peh, has a mouth, right? And we're going to understand why. So Benyamin was aware of what had happened with his brothers and with Joseph, right? He knew about Joseph being sold as a slave. He knew his brother wasn't dead, and he knew what his brothers had done and the lie that was told to Yaakov. And yet he did not reveal the secret, right? Welcome to Get It or Levi, don't mind. Yeah. And so he did not reveal the secret.
Sorry.
That's right. I kind of like it. Yeah. And it's like, nice to have a soundtrack. All good. My favorite ringtone was one of my sister's friends in Israel who had a typical New York Jewish mother, and whenever she'd call, he had a special ringtone that was set just for her, and it would say, "So don't answer, I'll die. So don't answer, I'll die. So don't answer, I'll die." Yeah. So, I think the tinkly music was quite nice. So, and yet he didn't reveal the secret. And the idea is that Benjamin understood that it wasn't for him to reveal this to Yaakov, that Hashem did not want Yaakov to know this at this point. He had kind of a divine understanding that it wasn't up to him to reveal this secret. And so the Midrash gives that as his modesty, and then says the yashpah is from yesh peh, has a mouth, but doesn't use it inappropriately. Has a mouth, but can keep a secret. Again, all about timing. Ultimately, that secret did need to come out. Yaakov did discover that Jacob did discover that Joseph was still alive. But again, it's all about the timing. So the conclusion from there, if I was to give you those examples from the Talmud and say, what is tzniut? You wouldn't say modesty. You'd say, what is it? What is tzniut? The ability to do what?
Keep quiet till the right moment.
Yeah, keep a secret, to keep quiet, maybe keep quiet until the right moment. And so when we think about something like the length of our skirt, that's just an expression of one way of keeping something private or keeping something hidden. And yet that's not the absolute essence of modesty. And in a way, it's a real shame that that's what modesty has become about, because we're missing something that is a great lesson for all areas of our life, like we gave with the example of tzedakah, or like we can see with the structure of the shul. And we'll look at some of those examples in relation to men first, and then we can talk about some other stuff in relation to women. It's interesting though, because for all 4 examples, each of these people held themselves back, even though they could have got personal gain if they had revealed the secret. So it's not just keeping a secret, it's keeping a secret when it's difficult to do so as well. There's an aspect of that too.
But where does modesty come? I mean, I'm thinking in our everyday life, and you see things that you are told and you're not able to share with somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not modesty. It's really...
You're right. That's why it's a strange translation, isn't it?
I think the word in between possibly might be self-restraint.
Interesting. Okay, so that the thing they have in common
is to be modest of, if say, for example, somebody who is
a billionaire,
and he would never know.
He's not showy with his
he's
money.
Not showing off. Well, there are others who like to show off, who are halfway.
Yeah.
But for me, that is modesty. But I don't comprehend half of.
Exactly. That's exactly why modesty is not the right translation. Because you're right, with modesty, we think of not being showy. Whereas actually tzniut, the Jewish concept, which is wrongly translated as modesty, is much broader, right? So you're absolutely right. Modesty is a very narrow idea and kind of relates to not showing off what you've got. Might relate sometimes to clothing, might relate to other things too, like if you're very blessed in a certain area, if you're very wealthy, or you're very popular or whatever, being modest, or you've achieved something huge. But actually, by translating this word tzniut as modesty, we're narrowing it down, like you said. It does a disservice, and it's limiting.
Because you see, there is a lot of people who do goodwill, and they will never accept,
like the tzedakah example, right? That they do it anonymously.
I mean, when in the situation where I live, there's a lot of people that come and do good things,
and no one else knows.
But they don't go out and say, I spend so many hours feeding somebody there.
And you know what though?
And for me, that's modest.
Who does know? Who does know what they've done?
Only themselves.
And
God.
Hashem.
Yeah.
So maybe that's perfect. If we get to the real essence, tzniut or modesty is understanding that the opinion that counts is actually Hashem's. When we do something, are we doing it l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven? Are we doing it in the name of Hashem? And what's cool about Judaism is there's merit in doing things even when we're not doing them for the right reasons. And again, the Talmud talks about the example of tzedakah, that even if we don't want to give, or we're giving to show off, or we're giving because we feel we have to, or whatever, we should still do it. And ultimately, by practicing it, we will live our way to doing it for the right reasons. Even I find that really comforting in relation to tefillah as well. The ideal is that we are able to pray in a way that is really genuine and that comes from our absolute heart and soul. But we're told if we can't do it that way, it's still important for us to keep practicing our tefillah, and that hopefully Hashem will aid us in adding that meaning and that intention to it. Yeah. So I think that gets to the real essence of this, which is that if we look at tzniut, it's not modesty. It's understanding or feeling really that what you're doing is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. And so when you ask, well, if it's just women, do I need to wear pants, or do I have to that can be one of the questions we can use for ourselves as a guideline, because sometimes Tzniut is also about what we represent to other people. For example, there might be something from my own standard of Tzniut or modesty that isn't important to me, but I feel like I need to model it for other people, so that it is important. And in that case, I wouldn't need to do it in the privacy of one space, but I might do it in another space, and that might be around how you are in relation, not just in a Jewish context, but we see that with how people present in a secular world as well, right? It'd be very odd to go into a courtroom setting and see the lawyer in short shorts and a singlet, right? And that's again not necessarily to do with this idea of modesty and hiddenness, but more what is the image that we are projecting to other people. And so there's another layer here as well, which is that what is on the outside does affect the inside as much as what's on the inside does affect the outside. I know one of the things that some of you have talked to me about is about when you're feeling like flat or low or it's tough, that sometimes putting on clothes or makeup can help lift you. And even though it's something you've done on the outside, it actually has a beneficial impact on you from the inside. And so we probably have experienced that at some time. And there are the sayings that we have in the secular world as well, the clothes make the man and that kind of thing. But I have to say, I have got sidetracked from the original question, which was, how does this affect men? What are some examples of men?
Could I give an example?
Yes,
that I
please,
thought of?
please.
And I actually have to think about, because I'm such an extrovert and Boris is such energy, very reflects about things for a long time. And I can think on times when he would be replying to something that he saw on news, which was against Israel, and he could see that it was really totally inaccurate. And he would prepare a reply, and he would sit on that reply and sit on that reply. And he would sit so long that by the time he's ready to send it, somebody else has replied. And I'm sort of kind of thinking, why hasn't he got that reply out? And there's no ego with him. He says, don't worry, I will use it another time. So there's something about his sense of timing. Doesn't have to be that he has to get it in first. He'd rather get it right. He'd rather reflect on it. And it's kind of like there's an absence of ego in that. And I wonder whether that is a kind of tzniut.
Yeah, to try and reduce our own egos is definitely part of the Jewish concept of tzniut.
He's not at all motivated by that. He's got his own timing, whereas I would think, well, you have to respond.
And one of the ways we might talk about that is thinking about the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So, that often we're in situations where there might be the more modest or tznius thing to do. And there might be something that would be more glorious, or, there's a nice saying about what you can get done when you don't mind who gets the credit. I can't remember, but it's something along those lines. And so there's definitely a place for the other concept that people talk about in Judaism is bittul, like nullifying yourself, that it's not all about you. It's an interesting one, and I think there's definitely a component of that in tzniut, and it's a beautiful example that you give with Boris,
because he really
there's a humility there.
He's always it's never about ego.
And it's interesting because when we look at our forefathers, a lot of their most heroic or challenging acts or most personal struggles are heroic acts in private, like the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. This happens very privately. Yaakov's struggle with the angel, also very much an internal private process. And the Talmud mentions the idea about Torah learning, that Torah learning that's done privately is retained. There's the idea of learning Torah for Torah's sake, that you're not learning it to be able to show how learned you are in Torah. And so all of these ideas, I think, do tap into this humility that comes with that too. That being said, in terms of men, we also even have examples of dress. I found this very interesting. So in Tractate Yoma 35b, Rabbi Elazar ben Hassam's colleagues would not permit him to wear a finely woven robe because it was see-through and sheer and you could see his form. There you go. And if we think about kind of the quintessential quote about what you're speaking about in terms of being humble and also this idea of tzniut and modesty, the one that comes up again and again and again is from Micha. So walk modestly with your God. Yeah, we've heard this saying before. The whole quote talks about to act justly, to love mercy, and to behave with tzniut in front of God. And that isn't specific to women. Yeah, that absolutely is meant to apply to men as well. And the one I've always found just, I don't know, captivating is probably the right word, and enchanting in a way, is that the up to the myth-busitng, the altar in the temple, we don't have steps, we have a ramp. Does anyone know why there's a ramp and not steps? It's not for easy access. It's not to make it accessible. Well, it's about the walk, not that it's harder to walk, but something that happens when you walk upstairs that doesn't happen when you walk up a ramp.
Isn't that why they've got the culottes on underneath?
Also, so one of the aspects of modesty for the Kohen Gadol is that underneath the robe there are also culottes, but the other idea is that when you walk up a step, there's a chance that you could expose the bottom of your leg, your ankle, even if you are wearing something underneath. And when you walk up a ramp, you're less likely to do so. But the embarrassment that would come from that is not about the Kohen, and is not about the people who are in the temple. It goes so far as to talk about not embarrassing the steps themselves. Isn't that beautiful? And can you think of another example where we don't embarrass an object? It's a weekly one.
Yes.
We do it every week.
It's just lighting candles.
Like, well, yeah, it's part of Shabbat. That's a little bit different. You're on the right track. It's another thing we cover on Shabbat. Yeah, the challah. So we cover the challah during the kiddush, so that the challah won't be embarrassed that we're blessing the wine first, right? So it's not just women, thank you very much, and it's not just men, thank you very much. It's objects like challah and steps, but it's also concepts like tzedakah. You know, it's for me, it makes me proud of Judaism that it considers this so beautifully, and all of this comes down to the idea of us being created in the image of God. So if we're trying to be godly and we are so precious that we're created in the image of God, then we behave with more dignity. And one of the examples I heard, which I found really compelling, was that, you know, you don't see the Queen of England, you know, dressed inappropriately and eating popcorn that's spilling down her front, you know. And the idea that if we hold ourselves in the esteem that we should, because we are created in Hashem's image, right, then we will treat ourselves with more respect anyway, and tzniut will follow. And it's interesting because I used to run the Eating Difficulties Education Network, Eden, where we would work in schools and do early intervention around eating issues and body image. And the research would come up again and again and again that the worse people felt about their bodies, the more they would partake in risk-taking behavior that would harm their bodies. You know, right across the spectrum in terms of what they chose to eat or smoke or drink or whatever, through to things like self-harm. So, and then just in terms of risk-taking behavior with other people as well. So really interesting that there's something about self-worth and understanding how precious we are that actually protects us in terms of behavior as well. And we actually have examples of tzniut and honoring tzniut outside of Judaism in the Torah and the Tanakh as well. And one that we just read recently, just 2 weeks ago, is about the Jewish people going through the land of the Moabites and the Ammonites and what they were permitted to do, right? And it's very interesting, actually, it's all about modesty recently, because we also had, with Parashat Balak and Bilam trying to curse the Jewish people, and the blessing that comes out is Ma Tovu, right? How this prayer that we say when we walk into the synagogue, how goodly are your tents, O Yaakov or Jacob. What was so good about the tents? Anyone? All of the doors were facing in the same direction. What is the consequence of that? If you've got a camp where every tent entrance is facing one way, how does that affect privacy? It means that families have privacy. Husbands and wives have privacy, right? That's what makes our tents beautiful. We're still all together. We're still in one camp. We're still one. But within that wholeness, that oneness, that sense of community, there's privacy. That is seen as beautiful. So back to this example of when modesty is kind of, and Tzniut is honored outside of the Jewish people. For the Moabites, we were allowed to oppress them, right? We won't go into detail about what that meant, but it's around, if they attack you and you defend yourself, are you allowed to take their stuff or not? Is the main kind of general theme around it. And for the Ammonites, we were not allowed to oppress them, right? What's the difference? Where do these two nations come from? And when we look at the origins, there's merit for modesty. So the Moabites and the Ammonites both descended from Lot. So if we go back to the story of Lot, don't look back, Mrs. Lot, we go back to the story of Lot. What we see is that, after Lot escapes with his daughters, they're hiding and they think they're the last people on earth. And because they think they're the last people on earth, they think it's up to them to repopulate the earth. It's not a pleasant story, but so the daughters are with their father and they have children from the unions. Now, the two daughters name their children in two different ways. One names their child Moab, from my father, right? Did this thing and then named the child that everybody knows. The other daughter, Ammon, from my nation, from my people, right? It's still a message there, but it's a more modest message. From the merit of the modesty, just a little bit of modesty, still not behavior that you want to hold up on a pedestal, right? But just that modesty, those nations later on that came from those unions are treated differently when Hashem gives us instructions of the Jewish people for how we do war with these people. Just mind-blowing, right? The extent to which modesty influences. And the good news for us is that we are riding on the coattails of the modesty of our mothers, when we talk about our foremothers, so all of that modesty kind of, if these nations could be affected by the modesty or immodesty of their ancestors, also we are affected by the modesty of our ancestors as well. Yes.
In the last Pinchas, which is the Parashat Pinchas, I was reading that Moab was not punished because that was going to be the tribe from which Ruth was coming from.
Very good, very good. Okay, so we
going forward.
And interestingly, when I gave the examples before about modesty, and we looked at Shaul and Benyamin and Rachel and Esther, we see merit from the modesty of these people in their descendants and in their lines and who comes from them. We're absolutely always reaping the benefits of those who came before us, which is why, by the way, when we start the Amidah, we start off by saying, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because it's like, hello, Hashem, even if you don't think I'm worthy, I've got some cred from my ancestors, which was still to come. Yeah, it was still to come, but I'm saying, we still have the merit of our descendants.
Yes.
Like something that we do in our lifetimes can still have impact on future generations, and what happens in past generations impacts us too.
In the future.
Yeah, both. Absolutely. So, again, we see this in secular life as well. If you're going for a job interview, right, and you know somebody in the company, or someone in your family or a friend or a teacher has a connection. When you introduce yourself, you might say, oh, it's so nice to meet you. I've heard about you from blah, blah, my blah, blah, and you say, this is my credibility, this is my connection. Interestingly, I don't know, in terms of modesty, whether, that's another, in Tzniut, that's another discussion as well. Yeah. Any thoughts or ideas on any of the stuff we've said so far? Yeah.
To think.
Yeah. I mean, have I convinced you that modesty is not just about the length of your skirt? Yes? Okay, good. That makes me happy. I feel like that already, if we've done nothing else tonight, the fact that we've said that the power of Tzniut is more than just about clothing is really good. That being said, absolutely, there is a way that it can be expressed in how we dress, and there is merit in that, but really the overarching message is are we doing something for the sake of heaven, and that is far beyond our clothing. I did hear a really nice tip in terms of how we can work out if we are dressing in a way that is appropriate, and that is that each of us will have spiritual mentors that we look up to, people that we respect in terms of their spirituality or their religious practice. And one thing to keep in mind is if I bumped into that person dressed the way I am, would I feel comfortable? And I thought, for all the different ways that I've heard for expressing how you can make decisions about what to wear in relation to Tzniut, that was the one that appealed the most to me in terms of it being relevant to everybody. For some people, because there are different ways that we do understand the laws of Tzniut. There are laws of Tzniut that come in terms of halacha. There are laws of Tzniut that are related to the community that you're in. There's the idea that you should look to the standard of the community that you're in. So if we think about that in relation to something like sleeve length in the synagogue, there might be a bare minimum that you're happy with, and there might be a bare minimum that the community sees as normal. And the idea is that you should go with what the community's doing if your standard is different to that, or less than that. So I might be perfectly comfortable going out with a sleeve or a dress that's a certain length, but if in my community the common practice is to go into the synagogue with something that's longer, it's respectful and appropriate to follow that, right? But I do like this idea of, if you picture your spiritual mentor or somebody that you look up to in terms of religious practice, if you bumped into them, how would you feel if you were dressed like this? And it can be applied to things other than dress. How would I feel if they were standing behind me while I said that? Or how would they feel if they walked in while I was watching that? This can help just be as a general guide. It may not work for everybody, but I thought it was quite a nice kind of rule of thumb to start with. Yeah. Okay, lovely. We're going to finish our recording there. Thank you so much to those who couldn't be here but have joined us online. Here we go.